Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. My name is Bianca Tavolari. I'm Cebrap's seminar coordinator, and we are very happy to launch this book that's called The Archives of Critical Theory, that has been edited by Isabelle Aubert and Marcos Nobre. This is a seminal book on the history and the living theory of critical theory. And we're very glad to have both editors here with us today, and also Raquel Patriota and Rafael Palazzi, who have also contributed to the volume. This is a partnership between Cebrap and Springer, the publishing house that has launched the book. And we also have we're very pleased, we're very thankful to Springer that has given us a discount code of 20% for everyone that wants to purchase the book. The seminar is going to be held in the following order. First, we have a brief presentation of both Isabelle Aubert and Marcos Nobre, and then we'll have Raquel Patriota and Rafael Palazzi, who are going to talk about their specific chapters. So I'm going also to share my screen with you, in which we will see the cover of the book and also the summary for you to understand how the book was structured. And without any further ado, I want to thank you all for being here. It's a great pleasure. We are doing it in English because the book is in English, but also because to help communication between us, and it's also going to be a record. It's going to be our live stream is going to be up at Cebrap's YouTube. So we are going to start without any further ado. The floor is yours, Isabelle, and we are very happy to have you here. Fortunately, we have everyone in person anytime soon. When we try to combine Paris and São Paulo and all the other time zones which people are in. But thank you so much for being here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bianca, for the invitation and for organizing the whole seminar. This is a great opportunity for us to present this book, The Archives of Critical Theory. This collective volume, The Archives of Critical Theory, is a homage we pay to the members of the Institute for Social Research by investigating their archives. So as you can see with the index, the volume is the result of a real collective work. We have contributors from 5 different countries in the project, 10 from Brazil and 14 from the global north, France, Germany, Switzerland, and the United States. All the contributors have worked in archives and highlight some aspects of the unpublished materials they chose to present. Our book contains also 2 letters from Jürgen Habermas and 1 from Karl Otto Appel, which were unpublished until now. Yes, you have them at the end of the content. We have always counted on the support of all the authors in assembling diverse materials, illustrations, and relevant information pertaining to the different archives, checking and correcting sources, translations, and references, and making themselves available for debating the text, which was very, very appreciated, a great opportunity for us. The active cooperation of the archivists and the various archives contacted was invaluable for the preparation of the book. Must highlight that. The Archives of Critical Theory is a book of memory, history, and also living theory. Concerning memory, critical theory was officially founded with the creation of the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt am Main 100 years ago in 1923 on the initiative of Felix Weil. To pay homage to the Frankfurt School, we wanted to recall what its work represented in its very materiality. The first objective of the book is to show the quantity of unpublished material still existing by the authors of the critical theory, which are now in funds in different parts of the world. In Germany, of course, but also in Italy or in the United States, for example. These archives remain the living memory of the authors of critical theory. Now, concerning history, if the writings and recordings of the thinkers of critical theory are ultimately accessible to us only through the materials deposited in the archives, these are not mere memories, we think. Archives are not monuments that enclose texts, but places that preserve them for new use. The history of critical theory continues today through the continuous publication of new yet untapped documents and the critical commentary they elicit. This is the second intention of our volume. Finally, living theory. With this book, we wanted to show that critical theory remains alive 100 years ago after the foundation of the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt am Main. While this current of thought was created by a small cycle of heterodox Marxist scholars in Germany, today critical theory is widely spread throughout the world. On the occasion of the 100th anniversary of the foundation of the Institute for Social Research, this volume, The Archives of Critical Theory, aims to shed light on the intellectual activity of some critical theorists by investigating their archives. The existence of archives containing the manuscripts, recordings, other documents of authors like Horkheimer, Friedrich Pollock, Herbert Marcuse, is known relatively in few circles, even within academia. Yet the very history of the Institute, which moved several times as its members fled the Nazi regime, this history already shows that without archive, it is impossible to fully understand the work of these researchers. The various places inhabited by critical theorists in exile were repositories of manuscripts, letters, and working documents. It is worth recalling the Institute's various homes. In Frankfurt, from 1923 to 1933, and from 1951 to date, simultaneously in Geneva, New York, and partially Los Angeles from 1933 until August 1950. So exile forced individual trajectories, which explains the stays of Benjamin, Horkheimer, Marcuse in Paris, and Adorno in Oxford, for example. The exile of the members of the Frankfurt School and the different moves of the Institute makes searching the archives a necessary task in order to acquire an exhaustive knowledge of those authors' writings, many of which remain unpublished. It makes this task necessary to become familiar with the materials they use and their own particularities, and to grasp the context in which the published books were written. Apropos theorists who, in the spirit of Marx, always stressed the relations between theory and practice, highlighting the material condition in which they worked is not merely anecdotal. Let's say a few words about the content of the book. The time span covered by this book extends from the mid-1800s to the present day. The volume begins by the archives of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, whose use inspired the foundation of critical theory. The study of these newly dematerialized archives presented here by Olavo Jimenez should be of interest to any researcher who wonders what documents were available to critical theorists at the time, in contrast to those available to us today. At the other end of the timeline, this volume includes a philosopher who is usually associated with the second generation of critical theorists, Jürgen Habermas. The case of Habermas is unusual, of course, as he's still involved in building his own archive. Not all the material is yet available, but the correspondence, that is, has enormous value and interest, as shown by the interview Rafael Paletti and Pedro Zan conducted with Romagnos. Between these two ends, the volume dedicates a section to the archives of the Institute itself and several sections to specific critical theories, in addition to cross-referencing the archives of different authors. That is a part, maybe part 9 or 10, I can't remember. The archives of the authors studied here are those of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, Walter Benjamin, Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, Friedrich Pollock, Herbert Marcuse, Leo Löwenthal, and Jürgen Habermas. The book is composed of articles by researchers and editors who worked in the different funds, and articles by interviews and articles by and interviews with researchers who were or are in charge of some of the archives or who are especially familiar with the material. Unfortunately, not all the members of the Institute for Social Research could be included in this volume, be it for the difficulty of finding a researcher available to write on a specific literary estate, or be it, as in most cases, because a proper literary estate is not available. The volume does not aim to be exhaustive, but it can be considered as an initial exploratory step into the subject. Hopefully, there will be much more to come on the issue of critical theories archive. Presenting these different archives is also a way to remind us that the Institute of Social Research was itself created as an archive. This is not solely because its first de facto director, Karl Grünberg, was a historian who edited the famous Archive for the History of Socialism and of the Workers' Movement. The main reason is that one of the previous aims of the Institute was to become a unique archive of the workers' movement. This story is depicted by Henrik Grossman, one of the most prominent members of the Institute. In a letter written to Paul Matic in 1931, Grossman wrote that the Institute was, I quote, "a neutral institution at the university which is accessible to everyone. Its significance lies in the fact that for the first time, everything concerning the workers' movement in the most important country of the world is gathered. Above all sources, Congress minutes, party programs, statutes, newspapers, and periodicals." End of quote. Neutral in this case means no affiliation as a group to a specific party or to a particular political strand of Marxism. The project was to bring together different conceptions and practices of Marxism. As is well known, the Institute as such chose to maintain a prudent distance from direct action, despite its commitment to Marxism. All these precious materials were almost entirely lost after the Nazis in March 1933 closed the Institute. The abrupt closure of the Institute and the dark events that followed make one realize in retrospect how hard the authors included in this volume had to fight to preserve their writings from destruction or from being scattered into different hands in different places. Let us recall, for example, the case of Walter Benjamin. Some of the letters he received were lost because he had to flee Berlin in a hurry. Other papers from him were found in Israel because Benjamin had sent them to Gershom Scholem. In Paris, where the Gestapo seized his belongings just after he got on the last train out of the city, Benjamin had been able to give some manuscript to Georges Bataille. Others came to Adorno in New York. The interview conducted by Fernando B. with Ursula Marx says more about the difficult process of building up a Walter Benjamin archive. As the different contributions to this volume explain, after being moved to different places, most of the documents were progressively repatriated after World War II and centralized in Germany. In Frankfurt am Main for Adorno, Horkheimer, and Leo Löwenthal in particular, in Berlin for Benjamin and for Adorno later on, and in Tübingen for Erich Fromm. But there are some documents archived in other countries. As Philippe Lenart shows in his contribution, some of Pollock's papers are in Florence, Italy. In the United States, we can find the papers of the thinkers who did not return to Germany after the war: Marcuse, Löwenthal, Franz Neumann, and Otto Kirchheimer, for instance. Some difficulties regarding the archival work are recalled by the authors of the volume, by the contributors. Today, organization ranges from the complete digitization of some of the archives, or at least the complete cataloging of the documents, to literary estates that are not yet effectively archived. Franz Neumann's papers, for example, are scattered between the estates of Marcuse and Otto Kirchheimer. At that time, long letters were common. Approximately half of the Horkheimer Pollock estate consists of letters, for instance. And manuscripts, in the original sense of the word, were rather the rule for books, courses, collective research projects, public interventions, and so on. There is also the question of the preparation of the archives by the author themselves. Michael Schwarz, for instance, reminds us that Adorno had not yet thought about organizing his essays. Another difficulty regarding the archival work around most of these authors is that the conditions in which the materials were preserved were not homogeneous and were sometimes extremely poor. This explains, for example, that Gunselin Schmidtner spent 11 years cataloging Horkheimer's literary estate with the support of numerous university librarians. This would be enough to prove that this volume is also dedicated to highlighting the invisible work of archivists and editors, and their frequently double or triple workload as archivists, researchers, and editors of an author's works. What a researcher can do with archive material depends on the materiality itself, as Olivier Voirol points out in his contribution. And such a materiality has not only to do with the content of the author's literary estate, but also with their materialization, so to speak, through the work of archivists and editors. That is why this volume gives a voice to archivists and editors as well as to researchers. Thank you. The floor is yours, Marcos.
Thanks, Isabelle. I continue the presentation, thanking Cebrap and the seminar coordination for this invitation and this opportunity. So Isabelle was talking about the question of the material media itself. This is, of course, very important in the history of critical theory. In the case of Marx and Engels, we obviously don't have any recordings. For Benjamin, we have only a few. But we do have, for the authors who were still alive after World War II, for instance, when television, film, and radio recordings became relatively abundant and could be preserved. This is something new in relation to the research in the archives. It's really important to distinguish between archives that have been so far extensively digitalized or published in books, and others that still await publication. Opposite cases in this respect, maybe Marx and Engels on the one side, and the Horkheimer states on this side, and those of Marcuse and the Institute for Social Research on the other. So on the other hand, you have almost everything published, or for the most part, and on the other side, you have very little published. Given this different current states of the archives, we tried in the book to balance between these different objectives and aspects in the composition of the book. So readers will find information about the content of each archive and the history of its constitution. The various contributions of the book, they present the materials in a way that they can be explored and explain how such explorations affected or may affect the state of the research. So we are also very worried about this, about the personal experience of researchers in the archives too, and how objectively this may affect the research in general. When you go to archive and you discover a new formulation or an alternative formulation for an idea that you were working on, or a bright new idea that was not developed in full in this in the author's writings and publications in general. So when you look at John Abramite's contribution, for instance, you see the realities of archival work in the early 1990s, and what were the difficulties then? What are the difficulties now? So we of course published this volume to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Institute. But despite of a specific section that is devoted to the archives of the Institute, the vast majority of the existing archives are those of individual authors. And this has put us a question, because if the Institute, the project of critical theory, is an interdisciplinary work, how can we just take individual authors or individual archives? If you take this individual archives in themselves and separately from the others, you don't get the general idea. You don't get the big picture of the interdisciplinary character of the work of the Institute. So it was important to highlight also this. If you read, for instance, the chapter by Adriano Januário and his analysis of the group experiment of 1955, you will see this in play, how the different contributors come together in a single research, which is also very important for us, not to isolate the archives as just personal or individual accomplishments, but as a collective project. So when we are doing archival research, the question always rises as to why certain materials were not made public. So were they unfinished versions of later published work? Were they mere drafts? Were they avenues of thought that were left untouched? Was it private correspondence? Or after a broadcasting, for instance, were they archived and just archived, as it often happens to radio recordings? In the case of critical theorists, the importance of their reflections on the times makes it impossible to make the materials discovered about them in the archives just museum pieces. They are also interventions in the public sphere. So we have to consider them as moments of an evolving thought, but also as something that's directed to understanding the present moment. So in this sense, we try to catch also the several relationships that researchers and the authors themselves established to the archives. So it's known that Marx and Engels did a lot of archive research. This is also true for Friedrich Pollock, and this is also true for Walter Benjamin. And there are also some of the authors that reflected on the very idea of being archived. And this is very important for us too. So not to make a book that was at odds with the reflections that the authors themselves made about their work on archives or their idea of being archived. One very important thing is to keep in mind that much remains to be done with the archival material that are already available, as the chapter by Raquel Patriota and Ricardo Lira, Raquel is here with us today, shows very clearly. However, the publication of original documents from the archives of individual members of the Institute is an undertaking which has been growing steadily, one could say, since the 1970s. Critical theorists were the first to oversee the publication of their deceased colleagues' unpublished writings, together with Gershom Scholem, for instance. Adorno and Gretel Adorno took care of Benjamin's manuscripts. Marcuse edited various of Neumann's essays, and many contributors to this volume have also made efforts to edit and publish archive documents like Gonzalin Schmidt-Neuer, Ursula Marx, John Abromeit, Peter Erwin Janssen, Dirk Braunstein, Michael Schwarz, Philipp Lenhardt. They are all in this volume. So after this general picture that we give you, we also want to address some self-critical questions. The research gathered in this volume reflects the accessibility of certain archives compared to others, or how the enterprise of archiving the writings of one or another of the authors currently stands. Then we have the question, by widening the gap between theorists who are increasingly in the light and those who remain more in the shade, are we not contributing, despite our own intentions, to making the best known authors like Marx or Adorno or Benjamin even better known to the detriment of other members of the Institute whose papers have been less well preserved, like Neumann, for instance, or who are not present in this volume? Erich Fromm, just to mention one. We hope not, but we think that it's important for us to raise these self-critical questions so that it doesn't give the reader the idea that this is a definite volume. It's not. It's just the first of many, or so we hope it will be. So the book aims to provide an overview of the archives of critical theorists, but this overview is not and cannot be exhaustive. The volume does not include all the individual archives for lack of space, as many authors that are involved, and also because in some cases there are no established collection, or we have not been able to find an available specialist to deal with it, like Isabelle already mentioned. The volume endeavors to present individual archives, but because of the overview it proposes, it cannot explore each author's archive as thoroughly as it might be possible to do. Just to give an idea of what is in the archive, how it can be explored, and what are the potentialities, and so on. To us, the project of reflecting on the archives of critical theory in light of the current state of research can only be a work in progress. The Archives of Critical Theory, the book, should be seen as the first volume of a series. That's how we see our own project. I am near the end of my participation here, but I would like to just very briefly emphasize one aspect of critical theory that is really important and that has a lot to do with archives, which is the diagnosis of the times. this is an effort that is very important for critical theory since Marx, and has been highlighted by Horkheimer and has been highlighted by Georg Lukács before him. We have the 100th anniversary also of History and Class Consciousness, famous book by Lukács this year. And archives, they allow us to reconstruct the diagnosis of the times of every author in some phase of his or her trajectory. And this is very important to stress. A theoretical dispute in critical theory is almost always a dispute on different diagnoses of the times. Raquel Patriota is here. She can tell you about this. How much researching the archives changes the way you see the work of critical theorists, and changes the way you see a specific phase, a specific moment of this author. So I would like to close this participation with this idea. It's not only very important to preserve the archive, it's also a way of saying how central and how important is the diagnosis of the times when we are talking about critical theory. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. Thank you, Isabelle. Thank you for staying on time. Before giving the floor to Raquel and Rafael, I would just ask everyone who's watching us and seeing us, you may as well make comments and also questions. We are going to open for questions after all, so you may already register your question through YouTube. We are able to see it. If you want to pose your question in Portuguese or Spanish or any other language, that's no problem. We'll be able to translate it for everyone to pose their comments or questions or curiosities on the archives and specific researchers. So please let your questions come so that we can interact. And then I'll pass the floor to Raquel Patriota. She's one of the contributors of the book with the chapter in co-authorship with Ricardo Lira da Silva. And the title is Adorno and the Post-War Artistic Debates, a Perspective Through the Archives. So please, Raquel, feel free to, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bianca. And first of all, I'd like to say that it's a great pleasure to take part in this book and to have written a chapter on Adorno's aesthetics together with Ricardo Lira, the co-author, who I'm also representing here in my contribution. I would also like to thank Isabelle Aubert and Marcos Nobre once again for the conception and organization of this book, which I'm sure will produce very important discussions in the field of critical theory. I'm going to present the chapter I wrote together with Ricardo Lira in a very panoramic way, indicating some of its general ideas. Firstly, the main idea of the chapter is to retrace Adorno's involvement with the post-war debates on art and aesthetics, above all considering some of his radio speeches and his public interventions. So we mainly focused on Adorno's position in the public artistic sphere. Our aim was to understand how Adorno's late writings were shaped by these debates, which remain registered in his archives. And there is a great number of radio recordings, transcripts, and notes that register those interventions in their archives. In this sense, we have selected both Adorno's broader discussions with artists, as well as some radio interventions in which he debated with art collectors, art historians, and some art critics. So by retracing his public interventions, we believe that we are also helping to unfold the historical relevance of Adorno's aesthetic work, and specifically his late work, his late aesthetics, showing that beyond his published writings, there is a vast and fruitful production and a very important participation in the cultural life of post-war Germany. So, basing these main ideas that I just presented here, the chapter is then divided into two main sections, which we consider to be the most important features for framing this background of Adorno's late aesthetics. In the first section, we focused on Adorno's musical life, and in the 50s and 60s, especially his participation in the Darmstadt Summer Course for New Music, where he gave lectures and met a new generation of the post-war musical avant-garde and prominent composers such as Pierre Boulez, Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and so on. We mainly analyzed how this contact with the composers in Darmstadt shaped his later critical music theory, bringing about relevant changes to his considerations on the new music. So we investigated in which sense there was a kind of change or transformation of Adorno's thought by the moment he took part in this new environment of musical production in the 50s and in the 60s, and how the contact with those composers led Adorno to the proposition of informal music, or he maintained the term in French also, musique informelle, in the 60s, which was a concept deeply rooted in Adorno's critical response to the current musical tendencies, mostly integral serialism that emerged at the contest. In the second part of the chapter, we discussed how Adorno engaged in a series of different debates about modern art in this post-war scenario. What we observed is that in that context, Adorno's radio discussions with art historians such as Karl Linfert and with art collectors such as Daniel Henry Kahnweiler were decisive for the construction of his writings, and specifically for an idea that will emerge in his late thought, that is the concept of Verfranzung, a very difficult term to translate, but that indicates such entanglement of the arts. This is a concept that appears firstly in Adorno's speeches, then in his lectures, aesthetic lectures, and further in his writings during the 60s, and that is essential to understand the construction of his aesthetic theory. So this entanglement of the arts represents, as Adorno suggests, a new development in the arts, insofar as the different artistic practices begin to merge, specifically in the 60s. In the sense, Adorno investigates the hybrid experiences between music and literature, between painting and music, among many other forms of art that question the limitations imposed by traditional artistic theories. This also sheds light on the fact that Adorno, in his later work, became interested in German avant-garde cinema, for example, understanding cinema no longer simply as a product of the culture industry, as he did before, but also as an art form that expresses the mixed and dynamic nature of the aesthetic experience. In his debates with cineasts like Alexander Klug and even Fritz Lang, we can see Adorno kind of reshaping his notion of the artwork, understanding it within the dynamics of experimental practices and its new connections with the mass media, Thus, we can see a different version of Adorno through the lenses of his debates. He was actively intervening in the public sphere in order to get as close as possible to the demands of art at the time. And it was no coincidence that he took part in a debate, a public debate with Alexander Klug, that was entitled Demands of Cinema. At the same time, he was measuring the extent to which an aesthetic theory could be constructed in such a context, considering the very fluidity of artistic practices at the time. Well, by gathering all these different aspects together, that is, Adorno's connection with the new experiments in music, as well as with his active participation in the public sphere, in the public debates on modern art, we could better understand and perceive the historical significance of his late writings and how he engaged with the current cultural life. We could also see that Adorno's aesthetics go far beyond the mere adherence to Schoenberg, for example, seeing how he connected his theory with different artistic movements and with the concerns on the developments of modern art after the war. We believe that this effort to reconstruct the historicity of Adorno's aesthetics is important not only to kind of reassess his work, but also to rethink its possible actuality. Well, I'll end here my contribution, and we can talk a little bit more in the questions and debate. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Raquel, for giving us a short version of the chapter. I'm sure that everyone is now eager to read it. And I'm going to pass to Rafael Palazzi, who is going to talk about the interview that he was one of the authors together with Pedro Zan. And the chapter in the book is called The Habermas Papers, an interview with Roman Yos. The floor is yours, Rafael. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Bianca. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to you for organizing this launch. I would also like to extend my thanks to Isabelle Aubert and Marcos Nobre, who kindly invited me to contribute to the book. I must begin by saying that my contribution was relatively small compared to the others, as I conducted a collaborative interview with Roman Yos on the Habermas archives with my friend and colleague Pedro Zan, and did not publish a complete article in the volume of the Critical Archives of Critical Theory. Despite my modest contribution, it was interesting in this research process, preparation, and work on our interview to discover a few things that I would like to briefly share with you. It's noteworthy that Habermas, though still alive, has already made available a significant amount of material for the archive at University of Frankfurt. The so-called Vorlass of Habermas, constituting this archive, mainly consists of correspondences dating from the 1960 to 1994, when Habermas retired from the University of Frankfurt. I believe that bringing this to attention of scholars and specialists in critical theory and in Habermas thinking is an important initial achievement for the role of our interview in this volume. Secondly, I would like to emphasize how, through conducting the interview, it became much clearer to me, and that this type of investigation, extending beyond the published works, becomes highly relevant for scholars that work on an author like Habermas. If Habermas can indeed be considered as a reconstructive philosopher, one who always starts from the incompleteness of the most advanced theory of his time, it is also important to note in these correspondences how Habermas engaged with the philosophical community and arrived at some criteria for selecting these theoretical advancements. This is evident in the letters between Habermas and Karl Otto Appel, already demonstrating in 1965 how Habermas considers Charles Peirce capable of establishing a connection between the young Hegelianism and pragmatism, a theoretical relation that remains crucial even today. This also holds true for Habermas' acknowledgement of Marcuse's influence on his work, as seen as such an important text as Technology and Science as Ideology, as Professor Isabelle Aubert notes on this in her comments on the exchanges letter between Habermas and Marcuse, which is also published in the book released today. Thirdly, I would also like to comment on how the interview with Jos put Pedro and me in contact with the work of Roman Jos, which is profoundly rich concerning archival research. I would just like to highlight how such research led to interesting conclusions regarding the question of, for instance, a rupture in Habermas thinking with what has been conventionally termed of the first generation of critical theory. Professor Jos accurately investigated the various influences that Habermas received from the outset of his publications, from the years of 1952 to 1962, when he published the Structural Transformation of the Public Sphere. His conclusion was that the influences were numerous and diverse to extent that's reducing them to the concept of rupture concerning to the intellectuals of the Institute is something like difficult to sustain. This broad influence is showcased in Jos' book covering Habermas' 10 youthful years. So I hope these brief comments, these 3 comments, I mean, first of all, that Habermas already, the Habermas archives is already available, that the notion that with this kind of research we can see some criteria of the work of Habermas, and also that there is some researchers that already isn't working with this kind of research, like Professor Jos, is something interesting to this start with archives research, like for an author like Habermas. I hope that these brief comments serve to stimulate your interest in reading the archives of critical theory. I just would like to add that the book you have in hand contribute to making it evident how indispensable this type of archival research is for philosophers and social theory researchers, specifically in the field of critical theory. This contributes, I guess, to the complexity and non-public genesis of the published texts, but also to new understandings of the complex theoretical themes and diagnosis of the times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rafael. I'm sure that this was very inspiring. we now open for questions. We have here several comments on YouTube from people congratulating you all on the book, on the great initiative, and how their comments in Portuguese, their comments in emojis like clapping. But since we don't have questions yet, I'm going to pose some questions. I have the privilege of being the mediator, so I'm going to pose some questions to you so that people feel more comfortable in posing questions if they have any. And please feel free to write in any language you prefer. So the book and your presentations, both all of you, have stressed how important it is to go deeper into into the materiality of theory, right? In order to uncover documents and registers that are made of unpublished texts that offer new lights and new perspectives, but also private documents of letters and that give context, that give like texture to what was being thought. So I have a kind of a double question here. The first one is that one about method. So philosophers or even social theorists are not used to looking at documents in such a light in an archive. This is more like a historian work and an archivistic work. So how are you seeing this combination? This is something that offers several challenges for us. And adding to that about methodology and how to treat the text, and text is very important for philosophy and social sciences in general, because we work with the text, right, in order to do conceptual work. How do you think, if you had from several different perspectives, how would you answer someone that says, I want now to work on an archive and I want to explore what's there to explore? How would you give orientation to someone that is starting to do that? And so the first question is big, but it's about method. And the second one is about theory itself. So you posed several new ways in order to look at critical theory and how it opens new perspectives of rethinking concepts, but also diagnosis of time. So one thing that's very striking is how critical theory in kind of a mainstream reading is seen as a kind of tradition that does not have empirical work, or that empirical work is minimized. So how do you think that the idea of theory changes, if it changes at all, when we're looking at the document and at this materiality of theory? And this is also valid for the distinction between empirical and theoretical work. So I have posed really big questions for you to feel free to grasp wherever comment you think it's suited and important. And I think it's for all four of you, however you want to start. Maybe we can make up the same order, starting with Isabelle, Marcos, Raquel, and Rafael. And then when people start asking and posing new questions, we do the other way around, starting with Rafael and the other way around. Thank you.
Maybe I say something concerning the first question about method. You're totally right. I mean, I follow you. The question of method is very important. What I would say, maybe, is that, first of all, we don't have always philosophers involved in the volume. I mean, we have an historian, John Abraham, for example, and I think he's following a method of history. We also, that's why also we asked archivists to propose some text or make interviews, because we knew that first it would be difficult to find philosophers working in archives, and then we wanted to have maybe people having an overview of specific archives. Then I would say it is difficult for me to answer in a very specific way, because I didn't do the job, right? So we asked people that went to archive and had a specific perspective. I mean, were looking for something, and what the result is interesting because I say there were archivists, a historian. There were also people working on literature and philosophy. There is also Inara, who is psychoanalyst. So we don't have only philosophers. I think the interdisciplinary aspect of the book is also interesting, to have different perspectives on the archives. Then maybe to focus on one method. I don't know. It's better if Raquel or Rafael reply to this to this question. The second question is much more for Marcos, I think.
Okay, Isabelle. It's a really good question because in the case of philosophers, it poses challenges that are normally challenges of historians or archivists or even people from the social sciences that make historical research. Because it implies things like learning the calligraphy of the 19th century, Marx's calligraphy, for instance, which is known to be very complicated. If you want to get to it, you have to get acquainted with some specific media that you are not acquainted with. We have also to remember that critical theorists themselves did archival work, as I mentioned. Marx and Engels, or Friedrich Pollock, or Benjamin. So how did they do that? They did that by learning how to work in an archive. You have to acquire certain techniques. You have to invest yourself with the knowledge that is required for that. And this is very good, not only to philosophers, but to every social scientists and historians that want to do critical theory, because the idea is that critical theory is not philosophical, is not theoretical. It's a combination of disciplines. It's a combination of empirical knowledge, empirical research, and theoretical research. It's a combination of practice, in the sense that it has this emancipatory intention, and also theoretical tools. So it is this combination. So it's also an invitation. This book is also an invitation to philosophers and social scientists that do not have these techniques to acquire them. So, and this book is also meant to give people some orientation in order to do this. Of course, there are techniques that you must learn in the university in specific formations and courses. There are also the possibilities of learning new techniques by doing archival research. So I know that your question is very wide, Bianca, but I would say, for the time being, I would try to complement what Isabelle was saying by saying that. Of course, Raquel can explain in terms of a much more specific topic, namely her research on Adorno. Adorno is someone that also wrote music, so you have this in the archive too. You have different materials. So please, Raquel.
Thank you, Bianca, for the questions. Yeah, I kind of learned doing, actually, because there is a lot of material in the archives, and there is no guide for you to direct your research. But what I mostly researched was the radio speeches, because this intervention in the public sphere was very important for Adorno, and to this to the shaping of his contribution to the cultural reconstruction of Germany in the post-war scenario. So I focused on the radio speeches because the way Adorno speaks in the radio is also very helping in comparison with his writings. So I focused on the radio speeches, and by focusing on this material, I could gather the connection he had with these art critics, art collectors, art historians, because he was very connected to these debates. So I kind of this research on the radio debates opened a public life of Adorno's interventions in the artistic sphere. So, and it was very important because in the case of the research on Adorno's aesthetics, I think that the archival material helps to understand his aesthetic theory, not as a rigid theory, not as a set of concepts that are very normative and final, but as shaped by these very experiences, these exchanges with artists and critics. So it helps to better shape how Adorno was transforming his vision on modern art, for example, during all the different phases of his work. So Adorno's conception of art and modern art in particular is not rigid, it's not a rigid one. And I think it's very important to emphasize, because there is a kind of common view of Adorno as an elitist, as kind of a proposer of a theory that it's normative of the most advanced material in the arts, etc. And when we look at the set of radio speeches and interventions, you see a different kind of intervention, a different kind of theory, a theory that is very connected with these practices, these artistic practices. So I think that is the main idea of the chapter and what we were trying to advance, in a sense. Thank you.
I just would like to add some thing, because for me it is also something new. My formation is also in philosophy, and it's very unusual, so to speak, this kind of work. But I just think that the book that is launched today is a kind of example of bring us some examples of people that already did it. For instance, like Marcos and Isabelle already quoted, for instance, the work of Abromite, the work of Peter Erwin Janssen are excellent works that bring us examples of how to do that, or how to explore this kind of source to new models of critical theory, or for rethink that interdisciplinary project within the archives. So I think that the book has also a preoccupation to bring instructions for. That's a very good thing, because you can find where are the Adorno archive, where are the Habermas archive, and where are they located, and how to access them. So that's a very, very good first step in order to show the relevance of the archives. So.
Great, thank you. While listening to Raquel, there's one thing, because no one has posed any question on it yet. I think that maybe everyone wants to hear a bit more from you. So one thing is that it struck me that Raquel was saying, well, Adorno is known for being a very rigid and elitist and a very fixed and closed version of music and aesthetics. And when you look at his contributions to the public sphere, this is not the case. So this is kind of a very interesting perspective or way to find contradictions, or even destabilizing some intuitions, or maybe even researchers that are being made without considering another part of the author's lives. So maybe some things that I was thinking while listening, especially to Raquel, but to you all, is that this is also a way to make them human. So they are not only authors of big books and articles, but they're also people who had connections with other people. So mapping their influences, where were they building their thoughts and concepts. So in order to give kind of density of a life density to the concepts. And maybe this is something that, to understand it as a diagnosis of time, because who were they talking to? What were the questions that were mobilized when the concepts were being formed or being constructed? But also, so this is one thing, like humanizing the authors in a very specific way, understanding that studying an author is not only studying the books, it's also studying how they wrote letters, how they were made public to the public sphere. So every aspect of how they manifested about their specific question of investigation. But also how the conception of archive, obviously it's in the title, but how it's central to understanding the whole history of the critical theory and the individual authors as well. So you are reading the Institute as an archive, because it was in its origins. You are then reading the work of the authors as a work of archive, be it of the people who passed away, of the authors who passed away, but also doing archives themselves. If we think about Franz Neumann, for instance, we can, despite the specific archive with his texts and documents, there's also something interesting to look at how he did an archive of legal decisions and judicial rulings in order to interpret them in the years of Weimar, for instance. It's also a really interesting way to interpret. So archive then becomes like of a kind of key in order to analyze each and every author, the methodology in order to have a basis, in order to understand and make comments and understand critical theory, but also the Institute as a form of archive. So I believe you're posing much more than this is just a way to organize and to do kind of new discoveries. This is kind of a way to organize how critical theory was being made. And it's also very important because an archive is a collective work. So it kind of resonates with the whole project of the formulation of Horkheimer of 37 and traditional and critical theory. So these are two brief comments about how to understand the authors in the very context and the conjunctures and the transformation of very fixed and specific ideas that we have when we read the books, especially. And also the idea of how the archive structures. Do you think that this is kind of the main takeout of the book? Should we start the way around with Rafael? And Rafael, if you want to comment on you comment a little bit on the process of posing an interview, but how the interview might be one access to an archive or to undiscovered documents. And even if someone is not doing the archive work themselves, there are other ways to incorporate the archivistic work in order to understand or to grasp new discoveries on specific authors and concepts.
Sure. It is also something new to prepare an interview, to find issues that are interesting to the public and to the researchers on Habermas or in team of critical theory. But it was a great experience because it was a collaborative interview. So Pedro and I discussed it a lot to what kind of question we can pose and what kind of approach we want to our interview. But in the case of Roman Jos, it was very good because Roman he was so good. He answered with and changed it a lot, the interview, and the process was great because of him. So, but there is something that is present in our interview that it's a very fun fact because not this kind of interview process is something that the Roman Jos did with Habermas himself. So it's also something because the Habermas archive, the archives that Habermas made available in the Frankfurt University ended in 1994. So there is a lot of texts that Habermas published before, after that. And so we do not have access to this material right now. But Roman Jos had the opportunity to discuss with an author that's still alive, like Habermas, on also this other publications. So it's something that this method of an interview is something very interesting to discover what kind of informations are underneath. So I think that preparing this interview and also discover these possibilities that goes beyond the published texts. It was for me a very, very new discovery. So just that. But thank you for your question.
So Bianca, you pointed to a very important element, that this is archival life of the published works of the authors. Because, for example, when we think of aesthetic theory, well, it's a very dense and very difficult and parenthetical book. But by looking aesthetic theory with the lenses of the archives, you can understand how this book collected a lot of different experiences that Adorno had with by talking with the composers, with the art critics. So the book itself, the published works itself, are also like archives of this life, this experiences of the author. And also by looking at the archives, we can shed light to all this density of experiences. So it was very important to look at these radio speeches because a lot of concepts that emerges in radio debates, television debates, for example, in speeches, public speeches, appears again in the writing, in the published writings, but in a different manner when Adorno kind of matured his thought. So it's very interesting to see like this development of a theory and how it was shaped by these connections. So, for example, he had a number of disagreements with composers, with different composers, like Govertz, Stockhausen, for example, in the beginnings. And these agreements also shaped his writing. So when we analyze his letters, we can see these agreements take place in the discussions. We can see how they return in the published writings. So it's a very complex life that it's happening between the speeches and public interventions and the published writings. There is like a very very fruitful development. So that helped us to also see the difference of Adorno's work when he returned to Germany, because it was really a transformation of his aesthetic positions. So the archives also helped to better understand this transformation. And in that way, we can see his thoughts not as a rigid one, as I said, but as this complex transformation with the discussions in the public sphere. So, yeah.
I go now? Yeah. Bianca, the experience we have when we hear an author that we study or with whom we engage alters the perception that we have of her work or his work. I would like very much to have heard the voice of Neumann that you mentioned, because everybody said that he had a metallic voice. I would like very much to hear that. But the archive has a unique advantage in comparison to the various materials that we have in the internet, for instance, because they are preserved together. So it's not like just we hear a TV debate from Adorno. We also have the letters. We also have Adorno's notes. We have all kinds of materials, so that you can have a complete picture and not just one thing isolatedly, as Raquel already mentioned. The result that we see published in books, there are, for instance, quotations from other authors, and you can say, wow, he has engaged with this author, or he took something from this author. This is one thing. Another thing is to understand and to realize that what we think is the result of all these interactions. There is nothing like the genius that produces a fantastic theory on his own. This doesn't exist. And for critical theory, that's a point, vital point, that we do that collectively, not just as individuals. So archive allows us to have this big picture of one person that is really in the middle of many other interactions, and the result of these interactions. So this allows us also to understand that in contradiction to some people who think that philosophy is something that's out of the time, that's out of the history, it's something like an eternal thought or something, that our thoughts, they are historical, they are tied to our time, and the better a person thinks, the more the thought is tied to the time. It's not the idea that you have to try to flee from your time. Quite the contrary, you have to try to understand it. And this is the main task of critical theory. This is what diagnosis of the times mean. So when you have the archive, you have all this information together. Sometimes you don't, but unfortunately. But when much material was preserved and could be properly stored in an archive, you have this network of interactions. So this is what I find amazing in the visits that I paid to the different archives.
Well, it's hard to add something after being the the later to speak. I would say that concerning the critical theories, it is very interesting to have this view on archive, because, I mean, there are different cases. Some materials were finished documents that were unpublished, and so I am thinking of Franz Neumann, for example. I mean, Marcuse was the first to publish his essays, because he died and he couldn't do that. So this, I think, these materials which were finished should be, I mean, deserve to be published without hesitation. And on the other hand, you have like private letters, public interventions, which were recording and we forget to I mean, to spread them out later, drafts. I mean, other materials which could be or not being published today, and that, I think, it's a interesting question we have to raise, just in order to know more first about the history of critical theory and the history also of the different works they were doing together. Now it's also a question of selection. What should be or not published? Are we respecting the choice of the authors or not? That is also something that show how archives, I mean, the way we make public archives is a very delicate work for editors. I would say also that for philosophers, what is very interesting in this combination of archival work and also the philosophical work is to see how philosophy is a work in progress. I mean, because you discover the different steps that were behind or before the finished material of a book. And then you discover that some perspectives were forgotten or maintained. And I think this is not also a way of humanizing the authors in the way that we discover biographical aspects, but also it's a way to show how they are philosophers in the way they are researchers. I mean, philosophy is still a research. But then, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Rafael, Raquel, Marcos, and Isabelle. It was great and very inspiring. One takeout is that that's a lot of work to be done, still a lot of work. I think you're inviting everyone to engage in a very collective work. And so I would like to thank you for accepting our invitation. For us, it's an honor to launch this book at Cebrap. Although it's online, we are able to make everyone get together here. There are a lot of people on YouTube or on Facebook I want to mention that John Abromite is watching us through YouTube. He posted a comment over here. He's one of the authors of the book as well. One of the chapters is written by John. And I also have to mention a very special thanks to Springer. It's the publishing house. And I'm going to share my screen with you because they gave us a discount code till December for 20% for anyone who wants to buy the book. So I'm going to share my screen with you in order for you to be able to see the discount code. Just a second. And there we have it. It's going to be also registered here at YouTube. It's a very difficult discount code for you to copy, but there you have it at Springer's website. You're able to buy it with a 20% discount. So it was a great discussion. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you everyone who's here that sent comments, and thank you for all the work you have put in order to start, as I heard, the first volume of the Critical Theory Archives. Let's hope there are several more. Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Thanks, Bianca.